The night air in Georgia hung heavy, thick with the kind of summer heat that seemed to settle into the bones of the old wooden house. The ceiling fan groaned above the bed, blades cutting lazily through the humid air, casting long shadows on the cracked plaster walls. Outside, cicadas sang their endless song, the sound rising and falling like a warning nobody ever paid attention to. Derek Monroe, a 42-year-old factory worker with calloused hands and the weary face of a man who had carried too many burdens, lay sprawled on the bed. His breathing was slow, his body drained from another day of sweat and grit. Next to him, under the thin sheet, was his wife of 10 years, Carla. She was the gentle counterbalance to his roughness, her laugh, her warmth, her stubborn determination to believe life would get better. Derek often thought back to the early years with Carla, moments that seemed ordinary at the time, but now felt like treasures he could never hold again. He remembered evenings on the front porch, Carla curled against his side as they watched the sun sink behind the pines. She would tease him about his stubborn streak, and he would laugh, really laugh, in a way no one else ever managed to make him do. There had been road trips too, short ones when money was tight, but enough to feel like an adventure. Carla would roll down the car windows, letting the wind whip her hair across her face while she sang along to old Motown songs on the radio. Derek would steal glances at her, thinking that no matter how hard life was, as long as she was beside him, he could keep going. Even at home, their happiness lived in the small things. The way she'd leave notes in his lunchbox, scribbled with words like, "I love you, stubborn man," or "Don't forget milk on the way home." The fridge door was still covered in those notes, faded and curling at the edges. Derek hadn't had the heart to take them down. Of course, the fights had come later. Loud arguments, slammed doors. But even then, they had a rhythm. Carla always believed they could mend what was broken. She once told him, "You and me, Derek, we're tougher than whatever life throws our way." Sitting in that bedroom now, unaware of what was coming, Derek didn't realize those memories would soon be all he had left. He didn't know that within hours, the laughter on the porch, the car rides, the silly lunch notes, all of it would be reduced to echoes he'd chase in the silence of an empty house. It was just after midnight when Derek stirred in his sleep. At first, he thought he heard the fan creak, or maybe the old pipes groaning. But then it came again, soft, almost like a sigh brushing against his ear. Derek. His eyes flickered open. For a second, he thought he was still dreaming. The room looked the same as it always did. The dresser with the crooked drawer, the wedding photo hanging slightly off-center, the nightstand cluttered with half-read magazines. The faint glow of a streetlight leaked in through the blinds, painting silver lines across the floorboards. Then he heard it again. "Derek, wake up." The voice was unmistakable. It was Carla's. Gentle. Familiar. The sound that had pulled him through long nights and dark days. He turned to her, half expecting to see her smile, maybe nudging him for forgetting to turn off the porch light. But the smile wasn't there. Instead, her face was pale in the half-light, her eyes wide open, glassy, staring at nothing. Her lips were parted, frozen, as if the last breath had been stolen before she could call his name. "Carla," Derek whispered, his throat tight. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing against her arm. The skin was cold. Not the coolness of sleep, but the unnatural cold of absence. He shook her shoulder gently, then harder. "Carla, baby, wake up. Don't do this. Don't play with me like this." His voice cracked, the sound jagged in the silence. The ceiling fan clacked again, as if mocking his desperation. He pressed his ear to her chest, waiting, praying for the faint thud of a heartbeat. Nothing. Only silence. The kind of silence that presses against your skull until you can hear your own pulse hammering in panic. Derek stumbled out of bed, his legs trembling, then rushed back, trying again. His hands fumbled over her body, searching for life, for anything. He felt the stiffness in her fingers, the unnatural stillness of her neck. And in that awful moment, the truth hit him like a freight train. She was gone. "No. No. God, no," he cried out, his voice so raw it rattled through the thin walls of the house. From across the yard, a neighbor's dog started barking. A light flicked on in the house next door. Within minutes, footsteps hurried across the porch, and a fist banged against the door. "Derek, you okay in there?" It was Mr. Willis, the retired postal worker who had known them for years. Derek, still clutching Carla's body, screamed back, "Help me. She's not breathing." Mr. Willis burst into the room, his eyes going wide at the sight of Carla sprawled lifeless on the bed, Derek hovering over her like a man drowning on dry land. "Oh, Lord," the old man whispered, fumbling for his phone. "I'm calling 911. Hold on, son. Just hold on." The sound of the phone dialing, the neighbor's frantic voice, the dispatcher's calm instructions, they all blurred together. Derek could hear his own sobs louder than anything else. He cradled Carla's face, kissing her forehead, his tears wetting her still skin. "Stay with me, Carla. Please, just stay with me," he begged. But her body was already beyond reach. The minutes stretched endlessly until the flashing red and blue lights lit up the street outside. 2 paramedics rushed in, their voices steady, professional. They checked for a pulse, for breath, for any sign of life. Then one of them glanced at the other, that unspoken look professionals share when hope is already gone. They didn't have to say the words, but they did. "I'm sorry, sir. She's gone." Derek collapsed against the wall, his body shaking violently, his hands clutching his head as if he could tear the nightmare out of it. His cries filled the small bedroom, louder than the sirens, louder than the cicadas, louder than anything else. And yet, deep in his mind, the echo of her voice lingered. "Derek." The whisper that had pulled him out of sleep now haunted him wide awake. The flashing lights of patrol cars painted the quiet Georgia street in harsh streaks of red and blue. Neighbors gathered in robes and slippers, whispering among themselves, craning their necks to glimpse what had happened inside the Monroe house. What they saw was a scene they would not forget: paramedics stepping aside, shaking their heads, police officers stringing yellow tape across the yard, and Derek Monroe, hunched over on the porch steps, his face buried in his hands, rocking like a child. Detective Lucia Parker arrived just after 1 in the morning. She was in her mid-40s, tall and commanding, her sharp eyes accustomed to the worst nights small towns could hide. Years of homicide work had etched faint lines around her mouth, but nothing had dulled her resolve. She ducked under the crime scene tape, the faint scent of honeysuckle in the sticky air clashing with the metallic tang she knew awaited inside. An officer briefed her quickly. Female, mid-30s. Found unresponsive in the marital bed. Husband claims he woke up to hear her calling his name, but when he looked, she was dead. No forced entry, no sign of a break-in. Lucia's gaze shifted to Derek, who was still trembling on the porch, his shirt damp with sweat and tears. She had seen that look before, raw grief, mixed with the terror of being under suspicion. Inside the bedroom, the scene was painfully ordinary, almost cruelly so. The dresser with the crooked drawer, the tilted wedding photo on the wall, the fan still squeaking overhead. Only Carla's body broke the illusion of normalcy. She lay still on the mattress, eyes staring blankly, skin pale against the faded quilt. Lucia stepped closer. She noticed faint bruising around Carla's neck. Not much, but enough to make her chest tighten. She leaned down, speaking softly as if the dead could still hear. "What happened to you?" The coroner quietly confirmed her fear, signs of strangulation. Carla hadn't died of natural causes. Someone had pressed the life out of her, here, in this very bed. Lucia straightened and turned to her team. "Secure the room. Bag every piece of evidence. I want fingerprints, fibers, anything. And get those neighbors' statements before memories start to blur." She walked back outside, where Derek was being gently questioned by a young officer. His voice was hoarse, broken. I didn't touch her," Derek stammered. "I swear to God, detective, I heard her voice. She called my name. That's how I woke up. But when I looked, she was gone." Lucia studied him closely. "You're telling me she was already dead when you woke?" "Yes, but I heard her, clear as day, like she was still alive." Lucia let the words hang in the humid night. In her line of work, people often clung to strange details, fragments of trauma, things their minds couldn't fully process. Still, she knew what the file would say tomorrow. Husband present. No forced entry. History of arguments. "Mr. Monroe," she said evenly, "we'll need you to come down to the station in the morning. You understand how this looks." Derek's head snapped up, eyes blazing through his tears. "You think I killed her? After everything? After 10 years of marriage? You think I'd do this?" "I think," Lucia replied carefully, "that my job is to find the truth. And right now, the truth is your wife is dead in your bed, and we need answers." The old neighbor, Mr. Willis, stepped forward nervously. "Detective, I've known this man 20 years. He ain't no killer. He loved that woman. You should have heard him screaming for help. It wasn't an act." Lucia nodded, but she didn't soften. She had seen men cry rivers of tears over women they themselves had murdered. Grief could be real, and guilt could be real too. The line was thin. By dawn, the Monroe house was sealed off, a crime scene in every sense. Reporters had already started circling, cameras flashing, headlines being written before the body was even cold. Wife found dead beside husband. Small town shocked by bedroom mystery. At the station later that morning, Derek sat in a cold metal chair, his hands shaking as he gripped a styrofoam cup of stale coffee. Lucia entered the interrogation room, files in hand. She sat across from him, her gaze steady. "Tell me about your marriage," she began. He swallowed hard. "We had fights. Who doesn't? She'd get mad when I worked too many hours. I'd get jealous when she stayed out with friends too long. But I never laid a hand on her. Not once. Your neighbors said she confided in them," Lucia countered. "Said she was scared of you when you got angry." Derek's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Scared of my temper, maybe. I'd slam doors. Yell. But I never hurt her. I couldn't." Lucia let silence stretch. The ticking of the wall clock filled the room. Then she leaned forward. "Here's the problem, Mr. Monroe. We didn't find any sign of forced entry. No broken locks, no footprints, nothing. Whoever killed your wife was already inside that house. That narrows the list down considerably." Detective Lucia Parker didn't stop at the obvious. Years on the job had taught her that truth often hid in the details others overlooked. She glanced down at Derek's hands as he gripped the styrofoam cup. Calloused, rough, the kind of hands that could build and break in equal measure. But there were no scratches, no swelling, none of the marks she had seen on men who strangled in rage and tried to claim innocence afterward. Her eyes flicked to his shoes. Mud from the yard still clung to the soles, fresh enough to confirm his frantic run outside when neighbors arrived. If he had killed Carla in cold blood, would he really have stumbled barefoot through the grass screaming for help, leaving himself so exposed? Lucia made a quiet note in her pad, her gut whispering what her mouth couldn't yet say. Derek might be hot-tempered, but this didn't look like his work. The scene was too clean, too calculated. Later, as she walked the perimeter of the Monroe home, she noticed something else. A faint scuff on the back door, not forced entry, but the kind of mark left when someone familiar slipped in quietly. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to keep her instincts humming. Lucia had built her reputation on trusting those instincts. She often told rookies, "Evidence speaks, but it whispers first. You just have to know how to listen." And that night, every whisper pointed her towards someone outside the marriage, someone who wanted the world to believe Derek was guilty. She straightened, closing her notebook. Whatever the truth was, she would find it. And she already suspected it lay in the shadow of a man whose name Derek had not yet spoken aloud. Derek slammed his cup down, coffee sloshing. "I was asleep. You think I could strangle the woman I love, and then convince myself I heard her voice calling me? That's insane." Lucia held his stare. In her gut, something told her there was more to this story. Maybe he was guilty. Maybe he wasn't. But the detail about the whisper, it gnawed at her. People didn't invent things like that without reason. When Derek was finally released pending further investigation, he stumbled out of the station looking more ghost than man. Reporters swarmed him with questions, cameras flashing. He ignored them all, eyes fixed on the ground, replaying the sound of Carla's voice in his head. Meanwhile, Detective Parker stood at the precinct window, arms crossed, watching him leave. She spoke quietly to her partner. "Something doesn't add up. If he killed her, he's the best actor I've ever seen. And if he didn't," she paused, her jaw tightening, "then whoever did this wanted us to believe he did." The partner raised an eyebrow. "So where do we start?" Lucia's eyes returned to the file. She flipped through Carla's background, her friendships, her history. Then one name caught her attention, scribbled in Carla's phone records, appearing more than once at odd hours. A name Derek hadn't mentioned. Marcus Reed. Lucia closed the file with a snap. "We start with him." Detective Lucia Parker sat at her cluttered desk later that afternoon, a cup of black coffee cooling beside her as she spread out photos of Carla Monroe's life. Smiling snapshots from church picnics, A wedding picture where Derek stood stiffly in a suit that seemed one size too small, while Carla leaned into him with genuine warmth. A more recent photograph, her smile dimmer, her eyes tired. Lucia had learned something over her years in homicide. A picture might not tell the whole story, but when you line them up in sequence, they reveal a slow unraveling. She began calling Carla's friends, colleagues, and family, piecing together the private life behind the public marriage. What emerged was a portrait far different from the happy couple in the wedding album. Carla's closest friend, Janice Holloway, sat across from Lucia in a small interview room. Janice's hands twisted nervously in her lap. Carla loved Derek, she began softly. But she was tired. She used to tell me she felt like she was walking on eggshells around him. He had a temper. He'd never hit her, but when he got mad, Lord, you'd think the house was going to split in two from the shouting. Lucia leaned in. Did she ever say she wanted to leave him? Janice hesitated. Once. Just once. A couple months back. She said she thought about packing a bag. But then she said Derek was trying, that he promised to do better. She always wanted to believe him. Lucia scribbled notes, her mind ticking through possibilities. A volatile marriage. A wife who thought about leaving. A husband who claimed innocence. Nothing conclusive, but dangerous ground all the same. Later that evening, Lucia drove out to Carla's mother's house, a modest brick home with wind chimes clattering on the porch. Mrs. Louise Carter, a sturdy woman in her 60s, met her at the door with red-rimmed eyes. My baby girl, she whispered, clutching a crumpled tissue. She deserved better than this. Inside, over a table crowded with family photos, Louise spoke with a mother's blunt honesty. Carla told me she was afraid of Derek's moods. I told her to be careful, but she said she still loved him. She wanted to make it work. Her voice broke. Now look where that love got her. Lucia felt the weight of those words pressing down. Every case had echoes of old mistakes, old warnings unheeded. Back at the precinct, she reviewed Derek's interview again. His grief seemed real, but so did the accounts of his temper. Still, something didn't sit right. If Derek had snapped in anger, why did the crime scene look staged? Why were there no signs of struggle except faint scratches on Carla's neck? That's when she returned to the phone records. The name Marcus Reed appeared again and again, late-night calls, text messages exchanged at odd hours. Derek hadn't mentioned Marcus at all in his interviews. Lucia pulled Marcus's file. He was 38, a local handyman with a checkered employment history, minor arrests for bar fights, nothing serious enough to keep him off the streets. But one note in the file caught her attention. Years ago, before Carla married Derek, she and Marcus had been briefly involved. Lucia tapped her pen against the file. A past romance, frequent calls, and a man who lived only a few blocks away. Marcus Reed had never really disappeared from Carla's life, not completely. Long before her death, there had been whispers of his shadow lingering nearby. Neighbors recalled seeing him parked in his old pickup outside the grocery store, watching as Carla carried her bags to the car. Once, a coworker said she spotted Marcus in the church parking lot on a Sunday morning, standing off to the side, smoking a cigarette as if he had no place else to be. Carla herself had brushed it off when friends asked. It's just Marcus, she'd say with a tight smile. He gets lonely sometimes. But underneath her voice, there was unease she couldn't quite hide. Months before her murder, Marcus had sent flowers to the Monroe house, anonymously at first, then later with a card signed only with his initials. Derek thought they were from one of Carla's friends until he confronted her about it. Carla admitted she suspected Marcus but begged Derek not to make a scene. He'll get bored and move on, she had said. But Marcus never did. Even his text messages carried a disturbing edge. He wrote things like, "We were meant to be," and "You can't pretend forever." At 2 a.m, Carla's phone would light up with messages that Derek never saw. She deleted most of them, hoping to erase the problem. Lucia read through these notes and small reports from neighbors, and a picture began to form, not of a casual friendship, but of a man who had let a brief romance calcify into lifelong obsession. Marcus hadn't simply wanted Carla back. He wanted her entirely, no matter the cost. That realization made the footage from the neighbor's camera even more chilling. This wasn't a random visit. It was the culmination of months, maybe years, of fixation. And for Detective Parker, it explained the raw bitterness in Marcus's eyes when he spoke of Carla. He wasn't just jealous, he was consumed. She visited Janice again, this time with a direct question. Did Carla ever talk about Marcus Reed? Janice's eyes flickered, betraying something unspoken. She mentioned him once. Said he'd been reaching out, wanting to catch up. She said it wasn't like that anymore. But she didn't want Derek to find out. You know how he gets. Lucia's instincts sharpened. Secrets. Hidden phone calls. A jealous husband. And now, a third figure emerging from the shadows. The next morning, she sat across from Derek again. He looked worn down, unshaven, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Why didn't you tell me about Marcus Reed? Lucia asked bluntly. Derek froze. Marcus? Yes. Your wife had been in contact with him. Quite a lot, in fact. Derek's fists clenched on the table. That son of a... He was nothing. A mistake from before we met. Carla told me she cut him off years ago. But she hadn't, Lucia countered, sliding the phone records across the table. She spoke to him just last week. Derek's face twisted in pain and fury. She promised me. She said it was over. I should have known he'd find a way back in. Lucia watched him carefully. His anger was real, but it was aimed squarely at Marcus, not at her. That told her more than words ever could. When Derek finally spoke again, his voice was low, broken. Detective, if Marcus had anything to do with this, you better find out. Because he's capable of it. He's always been obsessed with her. Lucia stood, her mind made up. Don't worry, Mr. Monroe. We're going to pay Mr. Reed a visit. As she left the room, she felt the case shifting beneath her feet. The story of a troubled marriage had just widened into something darker. And somewhere in the middle of that triangle, husband, wife, old lover, was the truth about who had taken Carla Monroe's final breath. The morning sun rose over the quiet Georgia street, spilling pale light onto the yellow police tape still stretched across the Monroe house. Detective Lucia Parker had barely slept. She kept replaying Carla's lifeless eyes in her mind, the faint bruising on her neck, and Derek's raw insistence that he had heard his wife calling his name. None of it fit neatly together. But now she had a thread to pull. At the precinct, Officer Daniels entered her office holding a flash drive. You'll want to see this, Detective. It's from the neighbor's security camera. Lucia slid the drive into her computer, the grainy black and white footage flickering on the screen. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., barely an hour before Carla was pronounced dead. There it was, a shadowy figure slipping through the back gate of the Monroe property. The man moved quickly but not carelessly, like someone who knew the layout of the yard. He didn't fumble or hesitate. He went straight to the back door, disappeared inside. Lucia froze the frame, leaning closer. The angle was bad, the face blurred, but the broad shoulders, the way the man carried himself, it was familiar. She played the footage again. The figure stayed inside for nearly 30 minutes before leaving the same way he had come. She whispered the name like a confirmation, Marcus Reed. Within hours, Marcus's mugshot sat on her desk, paired with Carla's phone records. It wasn't proof by itself, but it was enough to justify bringing him in. Lucia and two officers drove to Marcus Reed's small house on the edge of town. The yard was overgrown, the paint peeling from the porch. A rusted pickup truck sat in the drive, its bed littered with old tools. Marcus opened the door in a stained t-shirt, eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Detective Parker, he drawled. To what do I owe the pleasure? Lucia's tone was flat. We need to talk, Marcus. About Carla Monroe. For the briefest moment, a flicker passed across his face. Shock, maybe guilt. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. Figures. News travels fast in this town. At the station, Marcus slouched in the interrogation chair, arms crossed, posture defensive but calculated. Lucia laid out the evidence with steady precision. You were seen on a neighbor's security camera entering the Monroe's yard the night Carla was killed. Her phone records show repeated contact with you in the weeks before her death. You expect me to believe that's all coincidence? Marcus leaned back, smirking. I went over there, sure. Carla and I were friends. We talked, that's all. She wanted someone who'd actually listen to her, unlike that husband of hers. Lucia didn't blink. Friends don't sneak into backyards after midnight. She didn't want Derek to know. Marcus shot back. He was jealous. You know how he gets. His words echoed what Janice and Carla's mother had already said. Derek's temper was real, but the bruises on Carla's neck told another story, one Marcus couldn't talk his way around. Lucia leaned in, her voice low. Marcus, Carla is dead. She didn't just stop breathing in her sleep. Someone put their hands around her throat. And you were there. Marcus's jaw tightened. For the first time, the mask slipped. I didn't kill her, he hissed. She was alive when I left. Lucia let the silence stretch, her eyes never leaving his. She had seen this before, guilt trying to disguise itself as outrage. Finally, she said, if you didn't do it, explain the scratches under her nails. Explain why her DNA is under yours. Because the lab is processing it now, Marcus. When the results come back, we'll both know the truth. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his bravado faltering. His hands tapped nervously against the metal table. Look, he muttered, Carla and I, we had history. You know that. I cared about her. But she chose Derek. Always him. No matter what I did. No matter how many times she came to me crying about his anger. She still went back to him. His voice cracked, raw with bitterness. I loved her. And he didn't deserve her. Lucia's pulse quickened. She pressed harder. So what happened that night, Marcus? Did you decide if you couldn't have her, no one would? Did you watch her lying next to her husband and finally snap? Marcus slammed his fist on the table. You don't know what it's like. Watching the woman you love stay with a man who breaks her spirit. She called me. She wanted me there. She needed me. Lucia's voice was cold steel. She needed you so much that she ended up dead an hour later? For the first time, Marcus dropped his gaze. He had no answer. When Lucia stepped out of the interrogation room, she exhaled deeply. She knew what she had seen. A man consumed by obsession, drowning in jealousy. He hadn't confessed outright, but his words painted the picture. Back in her office, she pinned Marcus's photo on the investigation board beside Carla and Derek. 3 faces, 3 lives twisted together by love, resentment, and betrayal. Her partner walked in, glancing at the board. Think we've got him? Lucia folded her arms. Not yet, but the camera doesn't lie, and neither does DNA. She looked at Carla's wedding photo pinned above them all. Her smile seemed almost alive, as if pleading for justice. Lucia whispered under her breath, We'll get him, Carla. I promise. Outside, the Georgia night settled in again, cicadas humming their endless tune, while somewhere in the precinct basement, the lab technicians worked late, scraping beneath Carla's fingernails, swabbing every trace of evidence. The truth was coming, and when it arrived, Marcus Reed would no longer be able to hide behind smirks and half-truths. 2 days later, the results from the state crime lab landed on Detective Lucia Parker's desk. The folder was thick, the kind that carried answers people prayed for and dreaded at the same time. Inside, the DNA analysis was clear. Beneath Carla Monroe's fingernails, lodged deep in the crescent of her last desperate struggle, were skin cells matching one man, Marcus Reed. Lucia closed the folder slowly, a wave of grim satisfaction and sorrow washing over her. Carla had fought back, and in fighting, she had left behind the truth. She marched down the hall to the interrogation room where Marcus sat again, slouched in his chair like a man trying to look unbothered. But his foot tapped nervously against the tile, the rhythm betraying him. Lucia entered without a word, dropped the folder on the table, and slid it across to him. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What's this? More fishing. Lucia's voice was ice. It's your death sentence, Marcus. The lab confirmed it, your DNA under Carla's fingernails. She scratched you while you were strangling her. The smirk drained from his face. His lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted to the folder, then back to Lucia. For a moment, the silence was deafening, the weight of the evidence pressing down on him. Finally, he spoke, his voice cracking. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Lucia leaned in. Then tell me how it was supposed to happen. Marcus buried his face in his hands, fingers digging into his scalp. When he looked up again, his eyes glistened, not with innocence, but with the twisted pain of a man cornered by his own obsession. I went there because she called me, he blurted out. She said she couldn't take Derek anymore. She said she needed to see me. I thought it was finally our chance. Lucia's tone sharpened. So you slipped into their house in the middle of the night? While her husband was sleeping beside her. I just wanted to talk, Marcus insisted, his voice rising. But she kept saying no, that she loved him, that she couldn't leave. I begged her. I told her we were meant to be. She kept pushing me away. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. I lost control. 1 second I was holding her. The next, she stopped fighting. Lucia's eyes narrowed. Stopped fighting? Or stopped breathing? Marcus slammed his fist against the table, his voice breaking into a shout. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to listen. Lucia's gaze was unflinching. But you did kill her. And then you left her body lying there next to her husband, as if to frame him. You wanted Derek to take the fall. Marcus's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. I thought if he went to prison, she'd finally be mine. Even in death, I wanted her to be mine. The confession hung heavy in the air. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't screamed. It was whispered like a prayer, raw and broken, yet damning all the same. Lucia stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. You took her life, Marcus, and you tried to take Derek's freedom with it. But you left behind the one thing you couldn't erase: her voice, her fight, her truth. Marcus stared at the table, silent now, the weight of his obsession crushing him at last. Later that evening, Lucia met Derek in a quiet corner of the precinct. He looked hollow, the grief carved deep into his face. Did you find out who did it? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Lucia nodded. It was Marcus Reed. He confessed. Carla fought back. Derek. She fought hard enough to leave the evidence we needed. That's how we caught him. Derek's knees buckled, and he collapsed into a chair, his hands covering his face. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he whispered, I knew it. I knew he couldn't let her go. Lucia placed a steady hand on his shoulder. You were right. And now he'll never hurt anyone again. Tears streamed down Derek's face. It doesn't bring her back. No, Lucia said softly. But it gives her justice. That night, as Marcus Reed sat alone in his holding cell, the walls seemed to close in around him. The reality of life without parole loomed ahead, an endless stretch of years where his obsession would rot into regret. And in the Monroe house, now dark and empty, the ceiling fan still creaked its slow rhythm. To Derek, it sounded almost like a whisper in the night, a reminder of the last thing he thought he heard, his wife calling his name one final time. The courthouse in downtown Macon was buzzing the morning the trial began. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones flashing as they called out questions. Is it true the husband was almost framed? What drove Marcus Reed to kill? The story had spread far beyond Georgia. The wife who whispered her husband's name from the grave, the jealous friend who couldn't let go. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with tension. Wooden pews creaked as friends, neighbors, and strangers filled the gallery. At the front, the American flag stood tall behind the judge's bench, a silent reminder of the gravity of the proceedings. Marcus Reed shuffled in wearing an ill-fitting suit provided by the county. He no longer carried the cocky smirk he had worn in the interrogation room. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He glanced at the jury box and quickly looked away. Derek Monroe sat on the opposite side of the room, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He looked older, thinner, as if grief had carved years off his life in just a matter of months. Beside him sat Carla's mother, Louise, clutching a small framed photograph of her daughter. Judge Harrison banged the gavel, calling the court to order. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here in the case of the state of Georgia versus Marcus Reed, charged with first-degree murder in the death of Carla Monroe. The prosecution opened with a stark, deliberate statement. Assistant District Attorney Miriam Cole, a sharp woman with steel in her voice, stood before the jury. This case is about obsession. About a man who could not let go of the past, who slipped into the Monroe home in the dead of night, and who took a woman's life because she dared to choose someone else. The evidence will show that Marcus Reed strangled Carla Monroe with his bare hands, leaving her lifeless beside her sleeping husband. He wanted Derek to be blamed, but Carla fought back. And in fighting, she left us the proof we needed, his DNA under her fingernails. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will not lie, and neither should your verdict. The defense, led by a weary public defender, painted a different picture. This was not premeditated murder. This was a tragic accident, a moment of passion gone too far. My client loved Carla. He never intended to kill her. But the jury's faces were already stone. They had heard that line before. The jurors sat stiffly in their box, 12 strangers bound together by the heavy weight of judgment. Some leaned forward, taking notes furiously. Others folded their arms, eyes narrowed, trying to separate truth from theater. A woman in her 60s dabbed at her eyes when the prosecution replayed the audio of the 911 call, Derek's desperate voice echoing through the courtroom. One man clenched his jaw so tightly that the muscles in his cheek twitched each time Marcus's lawyer used the word accident. In the gallery, the atmosphere was no less charged. Friends of Carla sat shoulder to shoulder, clutching tissues, shaking their heads every time Marcus's name was spoken. A local pastor bowed his head as though praying silently for justice. Even the reporters, usually detached, looked unsettled as they typed on their laptops, their eyes flicking between the evidence and Marcus himself. Every sound in the courtroom felt amplified, the scratch of a pen, the squeak of a chair, the faint sigh of someone who had heard enough. When the prosecutor displayed the enlarged photo of Carla's fingernails, showing the microscopic fragments of Marcus's DNA, the entire room seemed to lean forward, breath caught. One juror shook his head slowly, as if the picture alone had already sealed his decision. Judge Harrison noticed it too. He adjusted his glasses and called for order more than once, reminding the gallery that emotion could not dictate verdicts. Yet he knew, as everyone else did, that this case had burrowed deep into their hearts. This wasn't just another crime. It was betrayal, obsession, and the silencing of a woman who had fought with everything she had. And as Marcus sat slouched at the defense table, avoiding the jury's gaze, the contrast could not have been starker. On one side, the family's grief radiated through the room. On the other, the accused sat alone, diminished, a shadow of the man he claimed to be. The jury didn't say a word, but their faces told a story of their own. They weren't buying the defense. The heart of the trial lay in the testimonies. Detective Lucia Parker took the stand, her presence calm but firm. She walked the jury through the investigation, the locked house, the lack of forced entry, the neighbor's security footage, the DNA analysis. She explained how every piece led to Marcus. "Detective," the prosecutor asked, "in your professional opinion, who killed Carla Monroe?" Lucia didn't hesitate. "Marcus Reed." Then came the most difficult testimony, Derek Monroe. When he stepped onto the stand, the courtroom grew silent. His voice was low, trembling, but steady enough to cut through the hush. "I woke up that night because I heard her voice," he told the jury. "She called my name. I thought she was still alive. But when I turned, she was already gone." His eyes welled with tears, and for a moment, even the defense attorney looked away. The prosecutor pressed gently. "Did you ever harm your wife, Derek?" "Never," he said firmly. "I loved her. Did we fight? Of course. But I would have given my life for her. And Marcus knew that. He knew she chose me, and he hated me for it." Carla's mother, Louise, followed. Holding her daughter's photo, she looked directly at the jury. "All I want is justice. My baby girl fought for her life. Please don't let her fight be in vain." When it was the defense's turn, Marcus himself took the stand. His lawyer urged him not to, but Marcus insisted. He spoke with trembling hands, trying to look remorseful. "I loved Carla. She called me that night. She said she needed me. But when I got there, she pushed me away. I lost control. I didn't mean to kill her. I swear it." The prosecutor rose, eyes narrowed. "Mr. Reed, you admit you placed your hands around her throat?" Marcus hesitated. I just wanted her to stop screaming. "And she scratched you." The prosecutor shot back. "Because she was fighting for her life, wasn't she?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. Closing arguments sealed his fate. The prosecutor's voice rang clear. Carla Monroe deserved a full life. Instead, she was stolen by a man who decided if he couldn't have her, no one would. You saw the evidence. You heard his confession. There is only one verdict that honors the truth: guilty of murder in the first degree. The defense pleaded for mercy, calling it a crime of passion, begging the jury to consider manslaughter instead. But the damage was done. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Reed, guilty of murder in the first degree." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Derek buried his face in his hands. Louise clutched her daughter's photo to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. Judge Harrison wasted no time. "Marcus Reed, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel cracked down like a thunderclap. Marcus slumped in his chair, his eyes empty. The obsession that had consumed him had finally destroyed him. As deputies led him away in chains, Derek looked up one last time. His voice, hoarse but resolute, carried across the silent courtroom. "You took her from me, Marcus. but you'll never take the love we had. That's something you can't touch. That night, when the courthouse was dark and the crowd had dispersed, Derek drove to the cemetery where Carla lay. He placed fresh flowers on her grave, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Justice was done today, baby. But it still doesn't bring you home." The wind rustled through the trees, and for the briefest moment, Derek swore he heard it again, her voice, soft, calling his name. And just like that night, he whispered back into the silence, "I hear you, Carla. I'll always hear you." The trial was over. The cameras had gone home, the headlines had shifted to other tragedies, and the courthouse that once buzzed with tension now stood quiet. For most of Georgia, the story of Carla Monroe was finished, another name, another victim, another file stacked in the archives of crime. But for Derek Monroe, the story never ended. Weeks after the sentencing, Derek returned to the small wooden house where his life had unraveled. The yellow police tape was gone, the neighbors had stopped whispering, but the room still carried the weight of that night. The dresser with the crooked drawer still leaned in the corner. The wedding photo still hung slightly off-center, and the ceiling fan still creaked with every turn, a metronome marking the seconds of his grief. He walked slowly into the bedroom, the place where everything had changed. The quilt was folded neatly now, but in his mind's eye, he saw Carla lying there, her eyes open and unseeing. He could still feel the panic in his chest, the helplessness that clawed at him as he tried to shake her awake. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands gripping the mattress as though holding on to the past. His voice cracked when he whispered into the empty room, "Carla, I miss you." The silence that followed was unbearable. But then, just as it had that first night, he thought he heard it again. Her voice, faint but unmistakable. "Derek." He closed his eyes, tears streaming freely. Was it memory? Grief? Or something beyond his understanding? He didn't know. All he knew was that the sound gave him both comfort and pain. Detective Lucia Parker visited him a week later. She stood on the porch, her posture softer than he had ever seen. She had seen countless families broken by violence, but Derek's haunted eyes stayed with her. "You holding up?" she asked gently. He gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Some days, I think I am. Other days, I hear her. Like she's still here, calling me. I don't know if I'm losing my mind." Lucia shook her head. "You're not crazy. Grief doesn't leave quietly. Sometimes it speaks to us in the only way it knows how." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of cicadas filling the space between words. Finally, Lucia said, "Carla's fight gave us the evidence to put him away. Don't ever forget that. She made sure you'd be free. In a way, she saved you." Derek nodded slowly, his throat tight. "I just wish saving me didn't cost her life." At the cemetery, Derek visited Carla's grave often. He would bring fresh flowers, sometimes daisies, sometimes roses, and sit on the cool grass, talking to her as if she were still beside him. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, he whispered, "They say time heals. But I don't want time to heal me if it means I forget you. I'd rather carry this pain than lose the sound of your voice." The breeze rustled through the leaves, soft and steady, almost like a reply. Marcus Reed, meanwhile, began his life sentence in a concrete cell. His name faded from the news, his obsession no longer whispered about in bars or grocery store lines. But Derek couldn't stop thinking about him. Not because he feared Marcus. He was gone from the world that mattered. But because Derek knew Marcus had stolen more than Carla's life. He had stolen the simplicity of their marriage, the peace of their nights, the joy of small things. Still, Derek chose not to let Marcus win the rest. He returned to work at the factory, his hands once again calloused from long days. He fixed the crooked dresser drawer. He even started going back to church, where the hymns felt heavy at first but slowly lifted him, like steady hands keeping him upright. And every night, when he lay in bed, he would close his eyes and listen. Sometimes he heard only the creak of the fan. But sometimes, on the nights when grief cracked open the quiet, he swore he heard Carla again. "Derek." And he would whisper back, voice steady now, "I hear you, baby. I'll always hear you." In the weeks that followed the trial, Derek began forcing himself to step outside of the sorrow that had consumed him. At first, it was simple things, sweeping the porch Carla used to decorate with flowers, fixing the screen door she had always complained about. Every nail he hammered, every board he repaired, felt like a conversation with her, a way of saying, "See, Baby, I'm still keeping this place alive for you. Neighbors who once whispered now stopped by with casseroles or offers to help. Derek found himself talking again. About Carla, about the good years, about the small town they had both called home. Sharing those stories didn't erase the pain, but it softened the sharp edges. One Sunday morning, he returned to the church he had avoided since her death. The choir's voices rose, shaky at first in his ears, but then something inside him settled. He sat in the pew, hands folded, whispering the words she used to sing louder than anyone. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. For the first time, the melody didn't feel like a knife, it felt like a lifeline. Derek also began volunteering at a local community center, helping younger men who struggled with anger, men who reminded him of himself. Don't let it eat you alive, he told them. Don't wait until it costs you everything. His voice carried the weight of experience, and people listened. At night, the whispers still came. Sometimes they startled him awake, other times they lulled him into restless sleep. But now, when he heard Carla's voice calling his name, he no longer trembled. He answered softly, I'm here, and I'm trying. Though grief would always linger, Derek carried it with a new kind of strength, the kind Carla had once believed he had all along. Life moved forward, but the echoes remained. Not ghosts, not hallucinations, just the lingering voice of love that had been stronger than death, stronger than jealousy, stronger even than Marcus's violence. Carla's last fight had left behind truth, justice, and an eternal whisper carried through the halls of that little house. For Derek Monroe, it would never be silence he remembered. It would always be her voice,